Are you a fan of math? My friend Mike over here, who's recording with me right now, says I'm a dork because I am. But if not, stick with me for 30 seconds because this math might just change your life. At some point in your life, your math teacher taught you about integers. Do you remember this? All right, hang with me. The word integer simply means whole and complete, unbroken and undivided. So in math, an integer is a whole number like 1 or 10 or 10,000. A fraction of any number or any number with a fraction, say 3/5, 2/3, 10 and 7/9, those aren't integers because they're numbers that aren't complete or unbroken or undivided. That is a fractured number. Now, play along here. Picture your favorite pie in your head with nothing eaten out of it yet, okay? Now, we're going to call that an integer pie. I know it's a stretch. Hang with me. We're going to call that an integer pie because it is a whole pie. Now, imagine taking 2 pieces out of that pie. How much pie do you have now? Well, not one pie. You have only 3/5 of a pie because the pie isn't whole. It's not an integer pie anymore. It's a fractured pie. Now, if you're thinking, what in the world does this have to do with today's episode? Nothing at all. I just wanted to make you hungry and confuse you a little bit. No, it actually has everything to do with the principle that just might save you from fracturing your life. I'll explain in just a second. But first, welcome to Journey at Home, where we inspire you to follow Jesus and get better at life. And every now and then, we throw in some math for you. If it's your first time watching, this is episode 3 of our series, The Perfect Guide for Life, How Integrity Brings Clarity and Courage. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you don't miss any of this series content. And we're going to talk more today about integrity. See, we celebrate integrity when we see it in others, and we expect integrity from all the people around us. But sometimes the expectations we have of others are not the expectations we place on ourselves. It's a lot easier for me to excuse away my lack of integrity because after all, sometimes I'd rather look good than be good. And I'd rather look like I have integrity than actually have it. But there is a price to pay when our integrity goes away. King Solomon, he references this in a piece of advice he shared with us about 3,000 years ago. It's the theme verse for this series. Solomon wrote, "The integrity of the upright, those who sit up straight, stand up straight, they look ahead, they think long term. The integrity of the upright will guide them, but the crookedness," crooked people live bent over, right? Not upright. "The crookedness of the treacherous," people who operate in the dark, or who lie, deceive, cover things up. "The crookedness of the treacherous," Solomon says, "will destroy them." See, people with integrity, they make integrity the primary decision-making filter in their life. They're guided by it, and they protect it because they know lacking it will lead to some painful hits in their life. So the way we have defined integrity is this. Integrity is doing what you ought to, even when it costs you. It's the resolve, it's the courage to do the right, the noble thing, regardless of the consequences, because it's the right and the noble thing to do. Now, let me tie all this together with what we talked about at the beginning. The word integrity evolved from our word integer. So when you have integrity, you are whole and complete. You are unbroken, unfractured, undivided. But when integrity in your life is broken, your life becomes fractured. When you lose your integrity, your relationships become fractured. The weight of your broken integrity, it gets transferred to the people around you. Now, I know none of us want to live fractured and broken lives. So why would anyone ever violate their integrity? I mean, why don't we always do what we know we ought to do? Why would we ever make decisions that hurt us, that hurt the people around us we care about? Well, because there's more than just our integrity that pulls for our attention. We all live with the tension between our integrity and our appetites. Now, maybe you have an appetite for money, an appetite for attention or appreciation, recognition. Maybe you have an appetite for winning or progress, or an appetite for food or sex or getting more stuff. Maybe it's an appetite for a drug or a drink. I mean, appetites, for the most part, they are wonderful within boundaries, but the challenge is keeping them between the lines, which is why our appetites pose a constant threat to our integrity. Just about every day, you're faced with this tension of choosing integrity or appetites, one over the other. Appetites always want to hold the steering wheel. They always want to drive decisions. And they always want to compromise your integrity in order to get what they want faster. Appetites are not big fans of delayed gratification, are they? But appetites left unchecked fracture your life. Now, on the other hand, you have integrity, right? Integrity plays the long game. Integrity often requires saying no to yourself today so you can be a whole person tomorrow. So you have to decide, will my integrity guide me, or am I going to let my appetites guide me? Do I want a whole life or a fractured one? There's this Jewish story in the Old Testament. I think it illustrates this tension perfectly. The story unfolded around 1800 BC, and it was between two brothers, Esau and Jacob. Esau was a hunter. He was a warrior. His younger brother Jacob was more of a homebody, and apparently he was a really good chef. They were both Abraham's grandsons. Maybe you've heard of Abraham. And as the oldest, Esau was set to inherit the birthright from his father, Isaac. Now, we don't really have a modern equivalent to this, but a birthright was a huge deal in their culture. The oldest male received it, well, simply because he was the oldest male. He'd get double the inheritance of all the other kids. And he had judicial authority in the family, imagine that, which meant if there was a dispute among family members, he got to rule on who was right, and what he said was basically law. And then he received his father's blessing, which in that culture equated to receiving God's blessing. So this is what is going on as Jacob and Esau both face this tension. The story tells us that once when Esau's cooking some stew, or Jacob, is cooking some stew, that Esau comes in from the open country and he's famished. So he's been out working, he's been out hunting. He comes back home, not just any old hungry, he's hungry, He's so hungry he feels like he's about to die. His appetite is raging, which is setting him up not to look past this moment. So he looks at his brother Jacob and he says, quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished. And this is what a raging appetite does to you, doesn't it? When you're craving something, you lose all perspective. You can't think about anything else but satisfying the appetite. That's where Esau is. Jacob, on the other hand, well, he is in a position that younger brothers rarely find themselves in. If you're a younger brother, you get this. Jacob has the upper hand on his older brother. He has something Esau is desperate to have. So what do you do when you're a younger brother and you realize you have leverage on your older brother? Well, you ask for the most extravagant thing you can think of, right? Oh, you don't want mom to know what time you came in last night? That's fine. You just need to drive me everywhere I want to go for the next month and clean my room. Oh yeah, and I want that pair of Jordans. That's what you do. When you know your older brother needs something from you, you're going to make the price tag so outrageous, and then you're just going to negotiate down to something that's still pretty amazing. So that's what Jacob does. Jacob looks back at Esau and he says, oh, you want a bowl of my stew? Well, first sell me your birthright. It's like, are you serious? The birthright's Esau's whole future. You want to trade a bowl of stew for that? Nobody would trade their birthright for a lifetime of stew, much less a single bowl. Who would trade their future for something so worthless? Who would trade their integrity, their self-respect, their career, their relationship with their kids, relationship with their spouse? Who would trade that for a bowl of stew? Who in their right mind would do something like that? Well, nobody would. And let's be honest, all of us could, because the craving of an appetite can get you out of your right mind pretty quickly. So when you're reading the story, this sounds really ridiculous, right? But let's be honest, we've all made ridiculous choices. We've all made some dumb trades because we craved what we wanted in that moment more than what we wanted for our future. And that's exactly what happens to Esau. He looks back at Jacob and says, look, I'm about to die. What good's this birthright to me? To which when I read it, I'm like, could you be any more dramatic, Esau? You just walked into camp. You're actually not about to die. You're just hungry. Grab a Snickers, man. Move on. It's going to be okay. But Esau is doing what we've all done. He's building a case in his head. He is lying to himself to convince himself that trading a lifetime birthright for a mealtime bowl of stew is actually a good trade. Now, have you ever lied to yourself to convince yourself that you should do something that was going to actually hurt yourself? I'll answer that for you. Yes, you have. So have I. So meanwhile, in this story, Jacob's going, are you kidding me? He's not even going to try to negotiate with me? And so he does what you would expect. Jacob's like, yeah, well, Esau, what good is that birthright to you? You can't use it till dad dies anyway, and that's way later. You may be dead by then. So how about you just focus on now and not later? Let's make this trade. Esau's fallen right into the trap. It's the trap we've all fallen into. He is letting his appetites guide him instead of his integrity. And so then Jacob seals the deal. He says, all right, Esau, swear to me first. Before I give you this stew, you swear to me you're going to do this. And so Esau swore an oath to Jacob, selling his birthright to him. Now, back in those days, an oath was a really big deal. You couldn't break it. And so this sealed the deal for Jacob. And the story tells us that Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentils too. And Esau ate and drank. He got up and left. And that was the end of it. The bowl was empty and the birthright was gone. The stew had vanished, and so had Esau's future. In the time it takes to eat a bowl of soup, Esau had forever altered his future. Now, all of us standing on the outside of the story, we go, are you insane, Esau? I mean, what are you thinking? What's wrong with this guy? But I bet you've had people who loved you who have said the same thing when you've let an appetite rule you. And I bet when the craving for the appetite dissipated, you responded just like Esau did. The story tells us that from this moment on, Esau despised his birthright. Seems odd, doesn't it? But rather than admitting to himself the mistake he had made, he decided to convince himself he didn't want that birthright anyway. It wasn't valuable. It didn't matter. It wasn't a big deal. He didn't care. He despised it. But you know the truth. Esau cared, just like you care, just like I care when we damage our lives because we trade what we want most for what we want now. But most of the time, we try to act like we don't care once it's too late to care, rather than deal with the pain caused by our carelessness. Very few people are willing to face up to the moments when they traded away their integrity. And quite honestly, that's tragic. You know why? Because you cannot be yourself as long as you're lying to yourself. Think about this. You will never heal and regain your integrity as long as you refuse to own your lack of integrity. You'll never be able to give yourself fully to somebody else as long as you lie to yourself, because a self without integrity is a fractured self. You're not whole. Jacob's deceit and Esau's short-sightedness set in motion a chain of events in their lives that ripped their family apart for generations. Your unwillingness to own, your unwillingness to repair your lack of integrity, I'm just telling you, it's going to haunt you too. So let me ask you, what's your bowl of stew right now? I mean, what's competing for your integrity at this moment? Who or what is difficult for you to say no to, even though you know you ought to? What are you talking yourself into that people who love you would love to talk you out of if they knew? What appetite is whispering to you, it's not a big deal, it doesn't matter that much? What are you doing that's not exactly illegal or immoral, but you hope nobody finds out about it? You wouldn't want to have to explain it to anyone. Here's my challenge for you. Listen, will you decide? Will you decide? I will not trade what I value most for something I have an appetite for now. I'm not going to be so short-sighted as to take a shortcut now to satisfy an appetite now and have it cost me what will matter most down the road. Will you do what you ought to even though it's going to cost you? Will you just pause right now and tell God, I am through with this stew, whatever that stew is for you, I'm done with it. God, I'm going to let your values guide my decisions. I'll let integrity be my guide. Now listen, if you've already traded something for a bowl of stew, would you just stop acting like it doesn't matter to you? Would you stop acting like you don't care? And would you confess to God what you've done? And then would you go make things right with the people that you hurt as best you can? Would you own it? Because until you do, you can't experience what you value and want the most. You can't be who you want to be when you have a fractured integrity. When any appetite rules you, it ruins you eventually. So let God free you and heal you and make you whole again. Own your part, clean up your mess, and then let God guide you. And decide from this point forward, do what you ought to do, even when it costs you.